Joining us now, she has been the head coach since the 2021 season over there at Belmont, just fresh off taking 2 out of 3 last weekend over Maryland. Team that is certainly on the rise. I speak of our good friend Laura Matthews. We're sharing off the air some great memories from the past, which we'll get to later. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Eric.
Well, how do you feel about your team? You're almost on the cusp of starting the conference play here at the Valley here shortly, soon here in the next handful of days, depending when people listen to this episode. How do you feel about your team? You had a big series win over Maryland, winning 2 out of 3 at home. You won on the road earlier this year on the West Coast against Arizona State. Just how you feel about your team this year?
Feeling really good. We've got a pretty veteran group. We've got some young players also, but when we were setting up our schedule for this year, we wanted to challenge ourselves before we got to Valley play. We wanted to make sure that we were giving our team an opportunity to see great pitching, for our pitchers to face great hitters, and with these, when you go to these tournaments and you sign up for them early season, like you might know that you have a good chance of playing the host, but you don't exactly know who else you're going to stack up against. So we've been really fortunate to have some great schedules where we've played some really high caliber teams. So really excited about how things have gone so far, like where we're sitting right now, and we got I think maybe 5 more games before we start Valley play next week.
Is this the toughest schedule you've put together since you've gotten to Belmont?
Yeah, I think we've played some definite high level teams since I've been here. We've played Tennessee the last couple of years. We've played a lot of the SEC teams, things like that. But in terms of like not playing anyone who stinks, we've had a really good schedule where it's like, hey, we're gonna go play a 5 game weekend and we're gonna play 5 good teams. So that part's been really cool. Is that we've just been playing, you're going into a weekend and you're like, oh my gosh, they're good too. Wow, they have great hitters. And so we're not having any off games. We're having to bring it every game. And if we don't, we lose. And so I think that's something that I've really liked this year is we have to bring it every single game or we're not gonna win. So that's been a really exciting part of this year's schedule. So I do think it probably has been the best top to bottom early season schedule we've had at Belmont.
Of course, you've been led by pitcher Maya Johnson. She's making noise. Certainly, has been off to a fantastic start this season. Just tell us a little bit about her, because certainly she has made headlines. Of course, beat Arizona State, beat Maryland 2 out of 3. I mentioned there she's been leading your pitching staff. So, what? Just talk a little bit about her because she's off to an incredible start.
Yeah, she's awesome. She's really awesome. She can beat you in a lot of different ways. She's got a really diverse pitch mix. She led the country in strikeouts per 7 innings last year. So she's not new to being really good. It's just sometimes, when you haven't been playing a ton of postseason ball like we have, you don't get those shiny accolades that maybe a lot of other pitchers do. But she's phenomenal. We'd put her up against anybody. She's high strikeouts, high intensity, high adrenaline, and this is her healthiest season she's had so far. So she had a really great off season. So we've been able to really see what she's capable of this year, and she's just been throwing phenomenally.
Yeah, I think it always takes people a year after the fact, because you're right. She was making some noise there under the radar, I guess, partly last year because maybe in the shadows of Monty Groff, who was at Southern Illinois at the time. But it's her time. Did you know she would be this good? I mean, you thought obviously she would be good. That's why you recruited her. But did you think she'd be this good, this elite?
So it's funny. I recruited her at my previous institution when I was at Wright State, and she said no to me. Um, and then, when she went in the transfer portal after her freshman year at Pitt, I reached out to her again. She said no to me again because she thought Belmont was too far from home. And then her situation changed with where she was going to go. I reached out again, and she said yes. So I'm relentless, and I think it's been a good fit for Maya. She's done so well academically. She's obviously a great softball player. So I thought she was going to be good. I think you learn a lot about people in the recruiting process, and obviously we knew she was a good pitcher. The thing that I think is really unique about her is she's just got this unbelievable intelligence of how to pitch, understanding of her body, her mechanics, her ability to self-correct, and she's so competitive. Like it's insane how competitive she is. So those things you don't always pick up on in the recruiting process, but it's definitely been something that contributes to her success.
How do you decide? Because there's certainly a balancing act. She's right, right now has been your best arm, but you don't want to overuse her, so you got to depend on other arms. So how tell us about the rest of the staff and that involvement there of developing that staff and depth with Maya.
Yeah, it's, when you do have somebody who's, one of the top pitchers in the country, you have to be smart in how you use them, what's the right amount, what's not the right amount. Um, Sometimes you're just guessing. A lot of it's asking questions. How do you feel today? What does it look like? Figuring out what your upcoming opponents look like. But ultimately, we're in the Missouri Valley. We know that we have to do really well in the Missouri Valley in order to win a championship and have postseason aspirations. I love the rest of our staff. We're still figuring out a little bit of how it all works together. We've got four other pitchers who all bring different things to the table. And they've thrown well in spurts. But I think some of them are still coming into their own. Two of them are really young. And two are a little bit more veteran, but are still figuring out, how to be as sharp as they can be day in, day out. And I think we've gotten some good appearances from all four of them. And then we've had some others where, we still need to grow a little bit. And I think that's the really cool part is it's a group that loves each other, cares about each other, and I think they complement each other well. So we're learning a lot about it. And I think the other part that's really interesting for college softball in general is we play these 5 game weekends where you might play 4 or 5 different opponents. Well, then you move into a 3 game series, and how you use your pitching staff is wildly different. It was one of the reasons why we wanted to play a 3 game series against Maryland, is so that we could start to figure that piece of it out. It's something that we've tried to do the last couple of years, and it's something that I've really found a lot of benefit for our team. It's good for our hitters too, right? You start to figure out, okay, this is what a team wants to do against me over 3 games. So it's something we're trying to do each year, before we hit conference play and you start to play those 3 game series.
Well, that was cool too to get Maryland to come to your park. That's credit to them on that. That was pretty cool. What was that experience like to host a Power Four school like Maryland at home?
Yeah, I mean, Nashville's great. Nashville's a really cool city where we are. So I think there's a lot of ease of travel for people. We've got a great airport. It's easy. It's 15 minutes from here. So especially as we start seeing these conferences expanding throughout the country, and the travel is so burdensome depending on your geography and your conference. A nice easy trip is something I think people are looking for early on, and I think Nashville presents that for a lot of people. And also families love to come to Nashville, spend a weekend here in the spring. So we are able to draw. I think we've had Big Ten teams here the last few years. We've had a Big 12 team here as well. So we've been really fortunate to be able to bring people some really high caliber opponents here. It's funny, our stadium is right next to our baseball field, and baseball had Notre Dame in that weekend for a three
Oh
game series.
wow!
So we had some crazy energy, a good atmosphere out here last weekend for sure.
How big is that you're able to host key series and tournaments with marquee teams instead of having to travel all over the place for the entire pre-conference like other programs have to do?
It's something that we know that we're really blessed with. We have good weather here. We can spend our first 3 or 4 weekends on the road, and then settle in a little bit for our first couple weekends. Then we tend to host a lot early in conference also because we are the warmest weather school in the Missouri Valley. So last year we spent most of the month of March at home. I think we only have 1 weekend on the road in March this year. So it's really nice to be able to kind of settle in a little bit, and spend some time at home for the girls academically, practice wise, life wise, but also you start to kind of figure out how to take advantage of that home field.
How important was that West Coast trip for this team from a chemistry standpoint? I mean, I watched that Arizona State game. It was a great game. Big win following that game. But how big was it from a camaraderie standpoint, from a confidence standpoint? Because you got some good results there. I know it wasn't like everything you wanted, because there were some games you probably felt could have played better. But I got a sense from the outside that your team grew from that trip and has, now at a different level than they were prior to that trip. Am I accurate in that?
Yeah, well, it was great. So we have a senior from Arizona. So it was really important for me that we got out there before she graduated. For her family, we have a lot of girls on our team who have grandparents who live out there and families. So we had a huge crew there supporting us, which was really awesome. We had fun. We went hiking, and then we played some really great teams. I think, we learned a lot from, we played Oregon, we played Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon's awesome. Those two teams, and we saw like, okay, this is a team. These are teams that know how to make adjustments in their bats. Obviously, great pitching. We faced Lindsey Grind from Oregon. She was phenomenal against us. We're not going to see anything better than that this year. So I think all of those pieces of it, we learned about how to compete against some of the best teams in the country. And we were able to kind of like challenge ourselves and see what we were made of. The younger players got to experience that for the first time, and also understanding like we've got some vets who have played some big games, who have played against some great teams, and watching them, be juniors and seniors now is really cool because they were dumb freshmen a couple years ago. So I think it was really great for us. I think we had a great trip, learned a lot about ourselves, and hopefully we just keep growing.
How would you describe the identity of your offense for what you've learned so far?
Whew, that's a good question. We've got the top of our lineup has been really, really solid. Um, I think all, our, Nicole Hughes, Emily Cockrell, Riley Spindler, who's a freshman for us, Bay Enzio, a senior for us. And then we have a couple girls who haven't even found their groove yet a little bit, that we fully expect to. So, we've gotten a lot of production out of the top half of our order. The bottom half, we saw really step up against Maryland in our third game this weekend. So I'm hoping that's going to be kind of the catalyst that gets us going a little bit. But we faced tough pitching most of the year. When you start to learn like, okay, I'm being exposed in this way, and then you're each hitter has to look at it and say, okay, so how am I going to handle that mentally, right? Obviously, there's the mechanical adjustments and things like that, but okay, I'm not off to a great start. What do I do now? We don't hit 4 home runs a game. That's not who we are. We've got most of our lineup who can hit home runs, but we are not, we, as currently constructed, we haven't hit a ton of home runs. We are a high on base percentage team. We draw a lot of walks. We pride ourselves on being a pain in the butt to pitch to. So you're going to make your best pitch, we might spoil it. And we're going to just be a pain. I think that's what we're good at right now. We definitely do have power. I don't think we've showcased it quite yet in the way that we're capable of, but we're really excited to watch that part of our game continue to develop throughout the season.
You mentioned obviously Nicole Hughes and Cockrill. They're right now they're your two best hitters statistically anyway. There, just speak of them and they're kind of setting the tone you mentioned there at the top of the order.
Yeah, I mean, those two have been playing next to each other in our middle infield now for 3 years. They've both been starters since day one since they've gotten to our program. Nicole's a junior, Emily's a senior, so they're just very experienced. They're very talented. They're athletic. They're strong, so they can hit lots of different types of pitching. And I think both of them are having maybe their best mental game seasons also. So they've been really great leaders for us, I think, in our offense. And day in day out, you're getting good at bats out of them. One of the things that's been really cool for us is the middle of our field is just so experienced. So, Bay Encio starting in center field for us. She's a senior. Nicole's a junior at shortstop. Emily's a senior at shortstop, or a senior at second base. And then we've got a 6th-year catcher and a junior catcher, and they're just very experienced up the middle of the field. And I think, any coaches who would be listening to that, it's just when they know what they're doing, it just makes life a lot easier.
It sure does. It sounds like are you pleased right now where your defense is at?
Yeah, we've had one real stinker. Our loss to Maryland, we were horrific. And outside of that, we've been really solid and really consistent. I think I'll give a lot of credit to Aaron Kuba, our assistant coach, who is in charge of our defense. I think we've been able to kind of take advantage of the strengths of our team. I think our infield has been really solid. Our outfield has made some plays. I think we've gotten good catching. So there's not a part of the field that we're worried about defensively. And that piece of it is really, I think, comforting to our pitching staff also, and allows us to do a lot of things and take some chances at times too.
You've been on with me now. You know me too well now, long enough that you knew that was my segue because I was going to ask you about your staff. Just kind of describe the staff that you've got there and the responsibilities that each has.
Yeah. So we're a staff of three. I made a transition this year. I've been working with our pitchers pretty much my whole career at this point. I moved over to the offensive side of the ball, so I'm working with hitters primarily this year because I had the opportunity to hire a great pitching coach, Emlyn Canarum. And so I gave away pitching for the first time in a long time, and it's been awesome. I think head coaches who work with pitching, it's exciting because it's such an important part of the game, but you spend a lot of time with like five kids. Um, this has given me an opportunity to spend more time with more players on our team. I still pop into bullpens and give my 2 cents here and there, and I still call pitches with in conjunction with Emlyn. But she's done such a great job, and we've got a group of really experienced pitchers, and then we've got a couple who aren't as experienced. So it's been kind of an interesting challenge for her in that regard, and I think she's done a great job. And then Erin Kuba, she is I call her a defensive coordinator. So she runs our defensive practices. I show up, help where I can, but she's in charge. And then she also helps us out with hitting as well. So we've kind of each have our main area of responsibility, but then we help each other out with, the other aspects of it as well.
I did not know that you had made the switch. Was that something that was predetermined? Was that something that as you were searching, it just evolved to that? Oh man, this is the best person for you. I'm the one I'm going to adapt. Just take me through that thought process.
Yeah, so I had an assistant for 8 years, Kennedy Haynes. So she was like my right hand man for a long time. And then she decided to get out of coaching, and go have a normal life a little bit. And for me, it was like I want somebody who's going to fit in with our staff, our culture. I'm really happy with where our culture is, and I've known Emlyn for a little while now, and I was really comfortable that she was going to be able to fit in seamlessly. I trust her. She has head coaching experience, which is really nice to have on a staff. So she gets it. She gets the parts, the challenges of the job, and things like that. So I liked a lot about her. And so I was like, you know what, we need to hire the best person we can. And I actually asked Kennedy about it, and I was like, what do you think about like, me turning over pitching, hitting? She was like, I think you're going to have a harder time if somebody comes in and tries to change a lot of hitting than the pitching part of it. And you know what? She's right. Like, I have a lot more things that I'm really passionate about hitting wise that I think are important than pitching. Like pitching, I think there's a lot of different ways. I think you just coach each kid very individually. I mean, our pitchers are all wildly different mechanically. They all throw rise balls really differently. They throw changeups differently, and it takes a special person to be able to work with them. But I think hitting is a little bit more culture based in terms of how your team approaches things, and so I didn't want us to take any deviations from where we were going because I thought we were headed in a good direction there.
That's so fascinating. So how was that transition? Because your pitchers were used to you. Now all of a sudden you're moving towards the offense. You're still involved with the pitching, but you're moving towards the offense. They've got to get to know a new person. That new coach, she's got to get to know them. Like, and then on the other hand, the offensive hitters now got to get adapted to you being more involved on the offensive side. So how were you able to transition all that in the fall? Was it smooth? Was it just because everybody knew each other? What would you describe that?
I would say on the hitting side of it, I was still involved. There were days when I'd walk in and I'd be like, don't want to mess with this person because I'm not exactly sure what they're trying to do with her yet. And so we'd go back to the office and I'd be like, hey, I wanted to say this, but I want to make sure I'm not stepping on toes here. So I was always been very involved with it, just not leading what we're doing day in, day out. So I don't think that was that much of a transition for our hitters. I think in terms of the pitching transition, that was something that was interesting. We have three returners. So Maya, Raina, who is a JUCO transfer senior this year, and Ellie Giles. And the three of them are just grown-ups, right? Like they're all very confident humans. They're confident in what they're doing pitching wise. They're coachable, but their DNA and identity as pitchers is in a pretty good spot already. So they were really far along on their journey. And we talked a lot with Emlyn when she came in and things like that about, okay, this is who they are. This is where they are in their journey. I think you can help them grow a little bit, but they're kind of formed in terms of the big stuff. So a lot of it was based on the three of them, their personalities, because they're amazing, amazing people and really smart when it comes to pitching. So I felt really confident that they didn't really need me. I think that's one of the mistakes we make as coaching in coaching a lot is we think that our players need us more than they do. They really don't. They're adults, they're humans, and if you're doing a good job with them, they are comfortable having a voice. So we have really great people who have a voice, and I think one of our main jobs as coaches is to be like, how does that feel? What do you think? How much? What do you need today? And I think that's a big part of what we try to do as coaches anyway. Um, and that was one of the things I knew Emlyn was going to be able to do well, and those three have done great. And then I handed Emlyn the keys for our two new pitchers, and she's done a good job with them so far.
We are speaking with Belmont head coach Laura Matthews here on In the Circle on D1 softball. How are you a different coach today than when you arrived in Nashville there at Belmont to take over the Belmont program?
Oh boy. I think I have a lot more gratitude for what I get to do every day. I'm a mom now, which is part of it. I have two kids. So when you become a parent, life changes in a lot of ways. You stop sweating as much of the small stuff. You're like, oh, my kid ate dirt. Who cares? Whatever. They're fine. They're fed today and clothed. So we'll do that. And so you start to kind of stop sweating the small stuff as much. And you start to appreciate, I think the little things more. Um, I'm at a university that I just love. I couldn't think more highly of Belmont in terms of our leadership on campus, the type of education our players get, the investment our school has made into softball and is continuing to make into softball. So I think there's just something really wonderful about working at a place that you just believe in at a high level. And I couldn't be a bigger fan of Belmont, and the type of players that we're able to get here.
And for people that know, when we had you on back when you got the job, this was attractive to you because this was home basically for Nashville. For those that may not be aware, speak of your kind of why this is home to you, and this was when this was an opportunity that presented itself was a no brainer for you.
Yeah, so I grew up in Nashville and lived here until I went away to college at the University of Dayton. And then when I graduated from Dayton and started coaching, my whole professional life was in the Midwest. My last stop before Belmont, I was at Wright State University I was in my fourth season when COVID hit, and then um, Wright State cut the softball program. We found out in June of 2020. It's no more. And so, all of our players' lives got upended. The coaching staff, our lives upended in a lot of ways. And that's when Eric, you and I got to know each other a little bit because you were so good to me in having me on the podcast where I could talk about the players we had, helping them find new homes. And this job that 2020 hiring summer was pretty quiet just because we were only like 15 games into the season. So I think a lot of people who were thinking about making a jump maybe just held pat, and a lot of schools that might have been thinking about making a change decided, hey, let's give it one more year because we had no idea what was going on in the world. So the fact that Belmont opened and it was back home felt like this is too good to be true for me individually, and it ended up just being the biggest blessing for me at the time and still is to this day.
Yeah, that was fun. I'm glad to help out on that. So you're the perfect person to ask you about this because obviously there was news that came out before the season that Cleveland State's going to be dropping their softball program at the end of the season. It's a little different than your situation, which makes it even more weirder, especially since they had just won their conference title and made the NCAA's last year. What was your reaction when you heard that news?
I was a lot of different emotions. I was sad. I was mad. Um, I think a lot of people on the outside are like, well, they just won. They're really good. And you start to realize that, like, winning doesn't necessarily mean that much all the time when money matters more. And that is such a jaded view on life at times. And when you feel that way, it's upsetting. Um, One of my players from Wright State, who was a freshman on the team this season, that got cut short by COVID, is actually playing for us in her sixth year right now at Belmont. So I remember walking into practice that day and looking at Grace and being like, "Dude, you see what happened with Cleveland State?" And she was just like, "I can't even." Know what they're going through. We know, unfortunately, a little bit of what they're going through, but we were just done. And Cleveland State has to play a season, try to make the most of their experience. And I can't imagine the ups and downs of what that feels like going through it while, players are looking for new homes. I don't know what the coaching staff is going through. Um, you try to figure out what the future looks like. And I think that part of it presents some challenges, but also some, maybe the season gets to be some closure in one chapter. So it's got some pros and cons with it. But ultimately, I think one of my concerns in general and the high level for softball is there's so much uncertainty in college athletics, house settlement, employment status, things like that. And I'm concerned that this is just going to be scratching the surface of what's going to happen. When you're talking about big money being involved, and higher education in general is not always thriving financially. And you just worry about not just softball programs, but lots of different athletic programs and the opportunities that these athletes might have that might could be going away. So I think it's really important during all of this that we have some perspective while we talk about big money NIL deals for people. And wow, look at this school that's doing all of these things. Most of the time it's at the expense of somebody else. And I think that's the part. I don't think there's more money to be had. I think it's being redistributed in a lot of ways. And I think we as softball leaders have to really be mindful of our game and the health of the game and the health of these athletes who are going to go through a lot of different things at a lot of different schools.
But it seems like too a lot of ways, especially in the major conferences, a lot of these moves are motivated because of football, because of maybe even other sports, men's basketball, etc. And they're not thinking about the other sports. There, I think that's where. Do you think you see a world down the road here where we might be headed where some people have suggested maybe football and the other sports, the schools that have football and the other sports separate because it's just not feasible. Like everybody can't function. You can't just expect a soccer program to travel as much what football's doing. Football flies charters. It's. I think you're right. We're in an interesting time here in college athletics where we're probably heading to some sort of collisions here.
Yeah, I think so. Anybody who tries to tell you they know exactly what's going to happen doesn't. I think ultimately a lot of this stuff is going to be settled in the courts and by Congress, because no matter what is decided, somebody's going to sue somebody else. And then it's going to have to play out in the courts. And then, ultimately maybe Congress will act one way or the other. And I think that's where we've got to remain flexible. And it's easy to get caught up in the big picture stuff. But ultimately, I think our job as coaches is to provide the best experience we can for our student athletes. I think that's ultimately what we have control over. And we talk to our athletes all the time about controlling the controllables, all that kind of stuff, that cliche. Well, what do we have control over? We have control over advocating for our players as much as we can, but providing the best experience they can, that we can for them, helping them academically, health, wellness wise, giving them the best softball experience we can while we let this play out way above our weight class. And I think, do I think football is going to break off one day? I think so, but I'm just some dumb softball coach, right? What do I know? This is big time money involved with it that we don't have a ton of say. I think it's way above
Sure.
coaches' pay grades in general. But I think it makes sense for football to break off in a lot of ways. I think it's operates very differently. They have different rules than we do. NCAA eligibility wise, like one of the things that is crazy. This is my soapbox is so a football player can play like 3 games and then just decide, okay, I'm done and I'm gonna redshirt for next year. If
Yeah,
you
four game.
go
Yeah, 4 games they can
4 games,
play in theory, right? Sure, and that's why there's been now a lot of conversation about the possibility of changing it to where now every student athlete gets 5 years, no matter what, 5 years.
yeah, and then like you can make one pinch running appearance and your eligibility's over. Like,
I've never understood that on the soft. Nobody's ever given me a good answer why that is in softball. That you play one game, you lose your opportunity to redshirt. Where other sports, there's more flexibility on that. That I've always never understood that part.
yeah, there's just so many things that are different, and there are so many things you're like, what? That doesn't really make sense. So I think a lot of that stuff is just going to play out, and I'm hopeful that it plays out in a way where student athletes are still given, as many opportunities and high quality experience. And that it doesn't just become where, the top 1% make a ton of money off of it and then at the expense of, the educational opportunities of the rest of the student athletes.
You mentioned the circumstances were different. As you mentioned, you were blindsided in June of that 2020. There was no softball. There was literally like, oh, like, what are we going to do here? You only got a few months. Like, your players had a few months to figure out what they wanted to do. Whereas Cleveland State's going through a season where they're playing, but at the same time, kind of already like, okay, this is what's going to happen in the year. Do you think it's better? I mean, there's no good scenarios there, but do you think Cleveland State at least has this season where they've got more time in a way to kind of figure things out? Whereas I remember that was kind of a quick 180 there, and I think that's one of the reasons why we connected because it was so sudden. And you're like, what do we do here? This is a type of deal there. Do you think in a way Cleveland State at least has this season where they've got a year to kind of figure things out what's the next move for all parties there? Or do you think it's more complicated because you are playing a season?
I think they're different challenges. I think really hard part is we had like 2 months until school started for our girls, and we were in a dead period. The NCAA put everybody in a dead period for COVID, so they couldn't go to campus to meet the coaching staff or the teams. So they're making their college decision based on a phone call, and maybe they would go to a campus and walk around by themselves. So I think that part of it was really, really challenging for our players at the time. Now I do think the Cleveland State players have the opportunity to go in the portal, talk to coaches, should have the summer to go on visits, things like that. But they're also dealing with some emotions of the day in, day out, looking at their teammate and being like, this is it for us together, right? This is the place where I thought I was going to be for 4 years, and maybe it's not. So I think, the other thing that was really hard for our players, and I'm sure there are some at Cleveland State going through this as well, is, say you're a junior education major and all you have left your last year is student teaching. Are you really going to go try to pursue a year of softball where it might take you 2 years to graduate now, taking on maybe additional debt or something like that? I know we had, I think, two or three of our players at Wright State who just like were like, I'm too far down my academic journey that I can't take a step back. Um, and so they didn't play again. And that was probably the hardest part, is to watch some players who really wanted to finish out their college softball careers who really, they just couldn't. It didn't make any sense for them and their families to take on maybe the financial burden, or the extra time that it would take for them to be able to pursue that.
What advice would you give them if they reached out and asked you for your advice? If Coach Kyler or any people over there would reach out for advice based on your experience, what advice would you give them?
Oh, the biggest thing I would do is probably try to not give them advice. Even just the the players I had at Wright State, who I'm in contact with most of them at various points in time, some of them went on and had amazing careers. Some of them went on and maybe didn't find the right fit, and everybody's experience was wildly different. I mean, I remember, I think this was one of the most interesting things. So we snuck out to a field, because back then you had to sneak out to a field in COVID, to record a skills video for two of our players. They were like starters who were kind of at the bottom of our order at the time, seven, eight hitters, and they were just starting their sophomore years. And so we're literally filming skills videos for them on a field that had like grass growing in the infield, and sending them out so that they could send them to coaches. Well, they both ended up being all region players at their next schools, and absolutely killed it and had amazing careers. Macy McCall at Winthrop and Meredith Keel at South Alabama. And they were maybe the two hardest to help find new homes. And they just had unbelievable experiences, and they're unbelievable people. And that's why. Um, so we had some great stories there. And I think just, taking comfort in the fact that, like, okay, you've done this before, you've done the recruiting process before, go play softball. And then, use your best judgment, rely on the people you love the most to help guide you as to where your next home should be. And just be hopeful. And that would be the only advice I can give them, because I don't have great advice, because everybody's situation is so wildly different.
How did that going through all that? Now looking back, you've had a long time now to, that's in the rearview mirror in a lot of ways. But when you look back and having gone through that, how did that change you? And what maybe if there was there a silver lining out of it from as far as kind of the being from a coaching standpoint, from running a program standpoint, or in general, just in general?
I think there's something to remember in life, that anything can end at any time. And so not taking anything for granted. That can be a season ending injury. It can be, any sort of tragic event happening in your life. It can be, um, anything can change in 1 second. And so being mindful of like enjoying the experience of the people around you, focusing in on the relationship part of it, and then trying to give your best every single day. My grandma always said, um, at the end of the day, when you look in the mirror, can you say to God, I gave everything you gave me? And I think that's a good way to go through life. And it's something that I try to remember. You lose sight of it from time to time when you get caught up in, the craziness of a softball season or life in general. But did I do the best that I could today? And trying to keep it that simple because at any second it can end.
Couple more things. You're a Bears fan.
Yeah, I am.
uh, Describe this past year and some of the meltdowns your Bears had and ways to lose.
Well, I'm a Chicago sports fan. And so right now is incredibly depressing all around.
I didn't want to
Um,
bring that up, but yes, yes, that is correct.
yeah, it's such a cool city and it's just a sad sports town right now. Um, you got to have an offensive line. Um, I think you've got to have stability and leadership, and they clearly did a poor job there. I think they keep doing the same thing over and over where they fire a GM, bring in a new coach, then they fire that coach, and then they bring a new quarterback. And they just need some stability in those three positions: head coach, GM, quarterback. And when one of them is fighting for their lives, it's not going to be good. So hopefully, the GM, who I'm a little on the fence about, hires a coach who I'm excited about.
Johnson,
And I'm very excited about him. I'm excited about Caleb Williams. I need the GM to kind of make me excited about him again because I was at one point. So a little stability there, and you know, get some people who can block. That would be great.
so you were glad to see Matt Eberflus move on.
Yeah, it wasn't great. I mean, they quit on him. They quit on him. So, we're not in the locker room every day. And I listen. Being a coach, you hear about. It's not always the coach's fault. We always get the blame, and coaches don't get to go and say, actually, that kid was a jerk. That actually, this was the problem. Coaches just kind of have to bear it, and I think he had to do a lot of that. So I wasn't in the locker room, but it wasn't great. And so, when you're getting paid that kind of money, you got to perform, and it's a wins and losses business.
He got to handle the clock management better than he did in
Oh
Thanksgiving
gosh,
too. I
yeah.
mean, I was kind of like, what are we doing?
Oh my gosh, yeah. It ruined
So
Thanksgiving.
complete. Yeah, it was a little rough for you there. Okay, but you're still okay. You're still all right. You're hanging in
Yeah,
there. You got Caleb. All right, you're optimistic. Good.
the
Um,
team I love the most is Belmont softball. Everybody else takes a backseat to that.
well, and that's the team that's doing well. And you're getting ready. You mentioned to start the Missouri Valley. This is year 3 for your program in the Valley. How has that transition gone?
Yeah, it's been good. And like everybody asked us that when we were leaving the OVC of the Missouri Valley. Like they schedule your games for you, so you don't have a lot to say, and you go play the opponent in front of you. And I think that's the part of it that, hasn't changed for us. It's like we're colder. It's a colder conference. That's been really the big thing. But it's a challenging conference, and it's but the OVC had some really tough teams too. I mean, we were the Jacksonville States, Eastern Kentucky's, Austin Peay's. Like we were really good our first couple of years there, and it was hard. Your schedule is made for you, and you go out and you compete, and you make the most that you can of it. And now we're at the point where we're familiar with our opponents. Um, I think this year there's been a lot of transition in the Missouri Valley in terms of a lot of pitchers who like it's been a really good pitching conference the last few years. I mean, we've had some pitchers who have just been top in the country and striking people out, and a lot of really, really big aces. Some of them have moved on, graduation, transfers, things like that. So I think there's a lot of transition this year in terms of that piece in the Valley. But I mean, there's some teams who can just flat out hit always. New people come in, you learn the new people, you try to refamiliarize yourself with them, but there are some really great coaches in this league who get their teams ready to play every year. So, all we have control over is how we play. And we'll try to attack that as best we can.
Yeah, yeah, great teams. I mean, Coach Jacobs got another good team at Northern Iowa, as he always does. Obviously, Southern Illinois defending champs. They're trying to come in transition. But you're right. Always the Valley's always, as you've learned now, It's always intense. It's always dramatic. And then when we get to that postseason, the conference tournament, it's wild. That's always one of the more unpredictable tournaments to plot twist their highs and lows. And that's probably some of the things you've learned, right, in the league now that you are kind of expecting that maybe you didn't know going in.
Well, yeah, a single elimination conference tournament is crazy. Um,
Yes.
and it might not be crazy in the SEC where it's like if you finish 500, you get an NCAA tournament. But like we're oftentimes a one bid league. Every now and then, historically things have changed a lot, but a lot of times it's just one bid coming out of this league. And so when you're counting on that in a single elimination tournament, it's really tricky. So the way that we kind of focus on it is like we want to put ourselves in the best position we can. We want to focus in on the regular season and then be playing the best softball we can when we come to it. Um, but it's a crapshoot, right? If you base your whole season success on, one ball bouncing away from somebody and that's your whole postseason, like that's crazy. It's a crazy way to live. Um, so, that's our structure. That's what we have. So we want to play the best we can in the regular season and position ourselves for the best seed that we can possibly have, and then go out and compete together and enjoy every moment in the tournament. But it's kind of crazy.
It's wild, but it's a fun and intense tournament. My last question to you: what is going to be the key now moving forward? What are one or two areas you think that's going to be key for your team to either improve on or do to accomplish your goals there in the league?
Well, health is the most boring answer, but yes, that's what everybody would say probably. Outside of that, I would say our staff outside of Maya, Maya's been great, Maya Johnson. I think the rest of our staff pitching the best of their abilities the rest of the way, having consistency in each outing that they bring to the table. So really seeing how the rest of our pitching staff comes together. um, and then I think we've got a couple of bats in our lineup that haven't quite reached what they're capable of, and they would be the first to tell you that, to kind of find their groove a little bit. And I think that's the exciting part is we have a few starters who I know are so good who haven't done it yet. And that's the really exciting part to me is once they do, let's go.
Let's go indeed. That is Laura Matthews, head coach at Belmont. They'll start Valley play shortly here, coming up here. Coach, always appreciative of you coming on and your candor, and you've always been awesome to us, and always love talking to you. And I follow your team pretty much on a daily basis there. Good luck the rest of the way this year. Thanks for coming on here on In the Circle D1 Softball.
Thank you so much, Eric.